These were a number of balls that the state was juggling together right from independence. And so population that had waited for about 50 years to live a dignified life, 50 years to live a life in freedom. And for them, independence translated into prosperity. Independence translated into dignity, into freedom. And government had to manage that expectation completely. So that was a second challenge that the government was basically faced with. And the third challenge that the government was faced was building a nation out of nationalities. As we've said, during the war, what had happened was that South Sudanese were divided by the government of Sudan, armed to fight against one another, and were made not to be able to easily interact and get to know each other. So what we literally had in South Sudan were a group of ethnic-based coalitions and militias that had scattered across the country and that had different orientation, different cultural identity, and different expectation. So pulling these different nationalities together into a nation with absolutely one single source of income, and that was crude oil. South Sudan, as it is today, is the most oil-dependent economy in the world. 95% of government's income comes from the oil. 99% of South Sudan export is oil. And with all this myriad of challenges, and with this single source of income, it was certainly going to be virtually impossible for the government to pull through these challenges without hiccups. And suddenly, one reason why we had a hiccup in 2013, because all these challenges could not be managed together, in some cases understandably, in some certainly not understandably, and when we come to looking at some of the analysis, we will certainly understand why some of them were not understandably. So that was that's one reason why we had a problem that resulted into war in 2013. Now the second is not only that we were dealing with these challenges all together, but there was a failed start at state building. Immediately South Sudan got independence, we had, as I said, one rebel movement that became everything, literally. And so the army, which is the SPLA, was not separated from the political party, which is the SPLM. And the state was not separated from the party, and the party was not separated from the army. Somebody literally said what had happened was we had an army with a country, and not a country with an army. And as a result of this, every single attempt to solving disagreement literally took on a military dimension, because we had a society that literally sorted out its problem using force. When there was a disagreement within the SPLM party, disagreement literally which had political inclination between the president and his supporters and the vice president and a group of individuals that shared similar political understanding. And the differences had to do with the internal democracies within the party. That differences was not managed quite well within the party, and since there was no separation between the party and the army, it was certainly not managed well within the army. And as a result, there was a fracture in the army on the 14th of December 2013, and that fracture then led on to what the government in his own fashion refers to as an attempted coup by the vice president against the president. And the vice president refers to that incident as an attempted assassination on him and his supporters, which then led to the vice president fleeing from the capital of Juba, and that led to a massacre along ethnic line of people from the vice president's ethnic group, and that is the Nuer. Literally within 2 days to 3 days, thousands of people from this ethnic group were massacred, were buried alive, burnt in buildings, and resulted into people from Greater Upper Nile joining the vice president call and taking up arms against the government. And that was literally the immediate beginning of the war that then emanated in 2013. But beyond this, as we have looked at quite briefly, there are underlying factors that we could say what happened in December 2013 was simply a trigger. A trigger because we had so many unresolved issues that was waiting for an avenue to either get resolved or explode. And unfortunately, we did not pay attention to this, and they exploded. And that is why people, even though were not surprised that South Sudan literally got into a crisis. So even South Sudanese themselves were surprised with the speed and the scale. And some of these underlying factors we will be looking at during our subsequent presentation, but we're going to look briefly at what the crisis has brought to South Sudan. As we sit and talk, we have thousands of South Sudanese that have lost their life between December 2013 and today in the senseless war that is unfolding in South Sudan. 4.6 million South Sudanese today are extremely food insecure, who certainly will depend on access to humanitarian assistance. And so far, humanitarian assistance has only been able to reach 1.6 million people. 2 million people internally displaced, with over 260,000 of them staying in camps that are kept by the United Nations, the civilian protection sites. Close to 1.5 million people have fled the country and staying in refugee camps in the region. We have thousands of children that has been recruited, according to UNICEF alone, in the month of May. In one state, over 159 children got murdered brutally by the parties to the war in South Sudan. Thousands of women have been raped as a result of the war that is unfolding in South Sudan. And all we're saying from We Are South Sudan is for every single child that has died in South Sudan, we've died. For every single woman that has been raped in South Sudan, for every single man that has been mutilated in that country, it's all of us. It's all of us that have been affected by what is happening in that country. And that's why from this platform and together with our African brothers and international friends, we're calling on the parties to the war to please bring the war to an end. And we're calling on international communities to try and put food on the table of those who today have to choose between who died first because of starvation. To try and put medical supplies and services in places where people literally bleed to death, dying from causes that they would never be able to, and their relatives would never be able to understand. And that we're able to provide assistance, humanitarian assistance, and put pressure on those who are fighting to open up humanitarian corridors as we bring the war to an end.